Hello, welcome to Cinex Movies. Today's movie opens with a
Suspenseful tone where a scientist in a space station is struggling to save some genetically engineered samples on orders before the doors are open for her to escape a supposedly crashing ship and save her life, also being chased by an alien. Davis Okoye, a primatologist, shares an unbreakable bond with George, the extraordinarily intelligent and friendly albino silverback with a unique sense of humor. At the wildlife sanctuary, where a couple of gorillas are kept and managed by Davis, are visited by Davis and his team. On reaching, they see a young male gorilla, Pablo, trying to establish his presence with the female gorillas, narrated by Nelson, until George shows up scaring Pablo and one of Davis's team members, Connor. Davis instructs that nobody moves or they get into trouble. Connor, unable to stomach his fears, takes to his heels. Pablo pursues him, but George is able to prevent Pablo from causing any harm to Connor. George tries to make a joke from the situation as he laughs at Connor for chickening out that way. Davis then urges George to be nice, accept and protect Pablo, as his entire family just got killed. Amy on Davis's team is trying her best to throw advances at him by asking him to come with her for a drink. Nelson was going to say yes for him, but Davis isn't catching as he isn't cut out for human relationships, let alone romantic ones. Nelson, who as well works with Davis, tries to ask her out as a second option for her, but she outrightly declines. She'd rather go with Davis. Davis prefers to hang out with animals more than with people, noted by Nelson, who considers it rather weird. Davis' only response is animals either like you or they don't, and when they don't, they eat you. You just know where they stand with you, unlike humans. Well, Nelson is also of the opinion that ladies always like Davis and not him, and that's making him consider shaving his head like Davis. The genetic samples in form of fireballs touch down Earth at 3 different locations, including where George is kept in San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary managed by Davis. George, a wolf, and a reptile happen upon the genetic samples, and before knowing it, they all are growing at an extremely rapid rate, accompanied by increased aggression and insatiable hunger turning into monsters. George kills a bear, which is very unusual, and he appears scared about what's going on with him. He gets isolated, as they perceive he's getting dangerous, and turning into something they can barely recognize as events unfold rapidly. Davis is informed of this new development, and he visits the site where the fireball hit at the wildlife sanctuary with intentions to get answers. Claire and Brett Wyden happen to be siblings that manage the greed-fueled company, Energen in Chicago, that engineered the experiment in space. Claire gets information on one of the samples that dropped at Wyoming, and she hires Burke, a private military personnel, to get the samples back, to keep her and her brother's records clean, while her brother handled the press on her directive. Burke, with a scar on his right hand, and his teammates from Greeley, Colorado, get hired to capture the wolf, dead or alive, before anyone else gets to it. In Los Angeles, Dr. Kate Caldwell, a geneticist at Energen until she gets framed up and loses her job, sees the news on TV where Brett told the media about helping mankind via their experiment. Dr. Kate is pissed by the statement and makes her way to find where the fireball hit around her city. Burke with his team arrive Wyoming. Unknown to them is where they meet their Waterloo, as the wolf targeted is way bigger than they could ever have imagined. Davis is adamant on reporting George to the authorities following the recent development, cause they'll most likely bring George down, and he believes he could figure out what's wrong with his friend, George. Kate arrives at where George is being kept with the hopes of getting the genetic samples back, but Davis demands answers instead as to what's happening with George. At first, she's reluctant to give a reply, but she later goes ahead to describe how George is unprecedentedly growing, the agility and aggression. Davis asks her to come with him to see George, as George was growing by the second. Kate reveals she developed a system which alters, or better still edits, an already existing genetic makeup by combining characters from different species of animals. George signals to Davis that he wants something to eat. Kate is amazed he can sign, and it all makes sense to Kate because of George's rapid growth. Kate tries to convince Davis that she's the only one with the cure to George's condition, but while she's still at it, George's impatience makes him year down the metal cage where he's being isolated as he makes his way out, destroying everything in his way. The cops arrive and are ready to gun George down, but Davis persuades them to drop their weapons as he can get the situation under control. Davis is able to calm George for a minute, as this sends a signal to the cops and they lower their arms. But another set arrive in a helicopter and shoot at George, getting him sedated. Burke and his team tried to shoot at the wolf from an altitude, but they couldn't get at it. They decided to touch down at their own expense, as the wolf gets them all killed with no exemptions, as Claire and Brett watched in disappointment from their office in the company. Kate and Davis meet Agent Harvey Russell, who gets them arrested and flown on the same plane as George after Davis warned that it was a bad idea for them to do so. Agent Harvey reveals both Kate and Davis's history, and it's news to Davis that Kate no longer works at Energen. As predicted by Davis, this got awry as George woke up from his supposed sedative, crashing the plane with only Kate, Davis, and Agent Harvey barely escaping the crash. Kate blames Claire and Brett for putting her in prison, and also for the death of her brother, according to Claire. For this reason, Claire and Brett are suspecting Kate is gathering evidence to screw them over, after seeing her with Davis and Agent Harvey. Claire thinks they ought to have liquidated Kate 2 years ago to prevent this from happening.
Claire comes up with a plan to turn on a radiological signal that will draw George the wolf and the reptile to itself, so the military can kill the wolf, and they collect their samples and make sales of it for millions of dollars as they earlier planned.
Jane's record visited Claire and Brett's company, and Claire thinks Kate is responsible for this. Well, Claire tries to frame Kate up again as she feeds the FBI agent with false information about Kate. At the crash site, Kate reveals to Davis the reason she created CRISPR while working with Energen was to cure her sick brother until she noticed Claire and Brett were building something dangerous with it. As Agent Harvey tries to communicate and get them assistance, trying to destroy everything she built, she gets framed up by Claire and her brother and thrown into prison. Her brother eventually died and she never got to say goodbye to him. Aid gets to them at the crash site, and they get taken to the military base where troops were already lining up to kill George and the wolf. Davis, rather surprised to see George and the wolf go in the same direction, states something must be wrong, noting that they're meant to attack each other on sight, owing to their nature, interrupting the commander, which gets him pissed, but Agent Harvey explains that Davis and Kate have answers to what's going on. Kate steps in to explain that they're being called by a signal, and nothing can stop the creatures from getting to it. The commander doesn't buy their narrative, and a message from the FBI requested Kate and Davis be held back for few questioning. Kate and Davis managed to escape to Chicago with Agent Harvey's help, using the hospital's helicopter, following Kate's idea that the military hospital would be in possession of one. On the first military operation, all the men get killed, but the military doesn't relent as they forged on to stop George and the wolf. Suddenly, a giant-sized creature began to move in the river and emerged. It was the reptile. The military pulled all forces on the creature, but it still wouldn't stop it, as it aimed for the signal too. Davis decides they need to secure the antidote from Energen's lab, as that's the only solution to not only halt the global catastrophe, but also save his friend, George. At the lab, Kate manages to secure just one antidote as against the 3 she initially took, cause they got cornered with a gun like Claire and Brett, as they themselves were planning on absconding with a helicopter on the rooftop waiting for them. Claire orders Kate to the rooftop as she shoots Davis in the abdomen after he refused to go with them, causing him to pass out. Davis recovers and is able to save Kate. They manage to get the antidote to George as Kate puts it in Claire's bag, and she with her bag is fed to George, just as Davis beckons on George. Brett escapes from the rooftop, but is intercepted by Agent Harvey, who manages to convince Brett that he could just walk away if he handed over the laptop and lab rat. Excited that that was all it's going to take for him to be free, gladly hands over everything to Agent Harvey, although he's always been the dumb one. Claire's the one with all the ideas. He heads for the door only to get crushed to death by a mighty brick that fell from up downwards. The antidote works out on George in a matter of minutes, and George is back to normal. George and Davis team up to defeat the reptile and the wolf and save the city. After much combat and chaos, Davis and George are able to defeat the wolf and the reptile, and save the city with George sustaining a serious injury on his chest from a sharp piercing object. George pretends to be dead, and this gets Davis emotional, but George was only trying to play Davis with his unique sense of humor, which Davis later got to find out. George laughs at Davis for getting that emotional, and teases him that he was going to cry. George asks about Kate, and Davis accepts that they were friends. He goes ahead to tease him about Kate, which left Agent Harvey giggling. Do leave a like, subscribe, and turn on your notification for more movies like these. Thanks for watching.